In this video, we're going to write a C program to find the two elements of an array whose sum is closest to 0. The first thing we'll do is declare and initialize an array of ints. So we'll have int array is equal to 25, 42, negative 31, 12, 55, negative 20, negative 18, negative 48, 16, and 34. So any two elements in this array can be added together. For example, we could add together this element and this element, or this element and this element. And what we're looking for is the two elements whose sum is closest to 0. We'll create a function to find these two elements. We'll call the function find min sum pair, and the function will accept the array itself as an argument, as well as the length of the array. Now we're trying to find the two elements of the array whose sum is closest to 0. A sum of negative 1 would be closer to 0 than a sum of 2. So we're going to use the absolute value function to help us make the comparisons that are going to find the two elements in the array whose sum is closest to 0. So we'll include the stdlib.h library that will allow us to use the absolute value function. Now the function itself has a void return type because we're going to have the function itself output the two elements and their sum. We can call the function down here. We'll have find min sum pair, and we'll pass it the array and the length of the array, which in this case is 10. We can now copy this and paste it down here. And now we'll define the function. So first off, we can't find any pair of elements at all if the length of the array is less than 2. So we'll check for that. If the length of the array is less than 2, we're going to return to stop the function. Now to find the two elements in this array whose sum is closest to 0, what we'll first do is assume that these two elements right here have the sum that is closest to 0. We'll store the sum of these two elements in a variable called minsum. Then we'll calculate the sum of all the other possible pairs of elements in this array. Each time we calculate the sum of a pair of elements, we'll compare that sum to minsum to see if that sum is now closer to 0 than minsum. If it is, we'll make that sum the new minsum, and we'll also keep track of the indexes of the elements with this sum, because these two elements are now the elements whose sum is closest to 0. By the end of this process of looking at all the pairs of elements in the array, we'll have identified the pair of elements whose sum is closest to 0. So let's actually implement this now. Down here, we'll have int min sum is equal to the array at index 0 plus the array at index 1. So we calculate the sum of the first two elements in the array, and we're going to make that the initial min sum. We'll also keep track of the indexes of the pair of elements that produce the min sum. So initially that's going to be index 0 and index 1. So we'll have here int min index 1 is equal to 0, and int min index 2 is equal to 1. And these two variables are going to keep track of the indexes of the pair of elements whose sum is closest to 0. So to look at every possible pair of elements, we'll use a loop nested inside a loop. We'll have here for int I is equal to 0, I is less than, length minus 1, and then I++. So the counter variable I is going to go from 0 up until length minus 1. Then we'll have a nested loop with a counter variable j that's going to go from I plus 1 up until length, incrementing by 1 with each loop iteration. And in this loop body, we're going to use I and j to calculate the new sum. We'll have int new sum is equal to the array at index I plus the array at index j. So we're using the indexes of I and j to give us a pair of elements for which we're going to calculate the sum. And I and j are going to go over all the possible pairs of elements. So just so we can picture what's going on here, in the initial outer loop iteration, I is going to be 0, and j is going to go from I plus 1 by 1 up until length. So we'll be looking at all the pairs of elements with this element here combined with each one of these elements here. Then in the next outer loop iteration, I is going to be 1. So we'll be looking at this element here, and j is going to go from I plus 1, again, by 1 up until the length. So we'll be looking at all the pairs of elements with this element here, combined with each one of these elements here, and so on, until we've looked at all the possible pairs of elements in the array. So now, we want to look at the new sum that we've just calculated and compare it to the existing min sum and see which is closer to 0. We'll use the absolute value function to help with that. We'll have here, if the absolute value of new sum is less than the absolute value of min sum, then new sum is closer to 0 than min sum, and we want to make new sum the new min sum. So we'll have here min sum is now equal to new sum. And the indexes I and j are the new min indexes. So we'll have here min index 1 is equal to I, and min index 2 is equal to j. And this will now keep track of the indexes of the pair of elements whose sum is closest to 0. So by the time this outer loop is done its work, we'll have looked at every possible pair of elements, and we'll have identified the pair of elements whose sum is closest to 0, and we'll have identified the sum itself as well. We can output those elements and the sum. Down here, we'll have printf min sum colon %d \n, and we'll output min sum. And we'll also output the two array indexes and the values at those indexes. So we'll have printf value 1 colon %d, and then occurs at index %d. And we'll output the value at that index with array min index 1. We'll also output the index itself with min index 1. Then we'll do the same thing with min index 2. So we'll copy this and paste it, and we'll have value 2, min index 2, and min index 2. So then we can save this and compile and run a program, and we get a min sum of -2 with the value 1 being -18 occurring at index 6, and value 2 is 16, which occurs at index 8. And if we go through this, that is correct. -2 is the sum that is closest to 0 out of all the possible pairs of elements in this array. So this is how we can find the two elements of an array whose sum is closest to 0 using C. Check out portfoliocourses.com, where we'll help you build a portfolio that will impress employers, including courses to help you develop C programming projects.